to firstly say to those members that are joining us from England and from the UK that we give our condolences on the demise of the Queen, who has been an inspiration and a model for many of us, I think for the entire world, on her comportment, her elegance, and dedication to not only her nation, but to the world. And secondly, on a happier note, I'd like to wish our Chinese members a happy Mooncake Day. So that is also another nice note today. And then I would like to give my introduction to say that I hope everyone had a lovely summer holiday and staying safe. This is our final Zoom meeting before the San Francisco in-person convention, beginning Tuesday, October 25 through Saturday, October 29. And if you have not registered for the program, it's definitely not too late. So please get in touch with Julia, who is on the top left of my screen, or phone the office at 410-467-9400 and leave a message, and we'll get in touch with you. And or you can even register at the desk at the Omni Hotel on Tuesday, October the 25th. I'm happy to announce that today we have 78 persons registered for the convention. And more good news is that the Autumn Journal will be published and mailed from Hong Kong in early October, so that you can view some of the bottles that will be on view from the famous Precursors collection at Bonham's, as well as the local members' bottles from the San Francisco group. Claire, our editor, is to be thanked for making these illustrated pages available to you as a teaser of what might be seen in San Francisco. My thanks go to Henrik, our facilitator, and Julia, my computer expert on all levels, for making this and our previous Zoom programs run smoothly. Before I introduce our speaker today, one final note of business. If you have not renewed your membership for 2022-23, please do so now. It's important for our financial well-being and for you to keep in touch with what's happening in the new snuff bottle world. Also, even if you cannot attend the convention, Bob Hall and we want you to participate in the benefit auction by donating generous gifts and having you take part in the bidding, which will be live from San Francisco. Julia will send out a notice on how this is to be accomplished. Today, I will speak about our speaker, Koos de Jong, and I apologize if my pronunciation is not correct, who is a relatively new ICSBS member from the Netherlands, but very active, I'm happy to say. His background is that he graduated in art history, medieval archaeology, and archival science at the University of Amsterdam in 1976. And since 1976, successfully acted as scientific staff member at the Historical Museum in Amsterdam, followed by director and chief curator at a number of museums in the Netherlands, including director of the European Ceramic Work Center in Den Bosch. After retirement in 2009, he remained active as a researcher and publicist in the field of Oriental art, author of hundreds of articles and several books, and including a recently published Small China, Early Chinese Miniatures, a Rediscovered Cultural Phenomena, which was published in 2021. Privately, he collects Chinese art, including snuff bottles and Oriental carpets, and also has begun a discussion on our forum on cloisonné. And although there have been some little glitches related to the amount of pictures to be sent. Nevertheless, we are ironing out those problems as we speak. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our member, Koos de Jong. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay.
May I share screen?
And I should also recommend that his wife is helping him, who is on the screen.
Absolutely.
Hello, everyone.
My apologies.
Yep. There it is. Okay, well, as you know already, I'm Koos de Jong. This is my wife Ingeborg, assisting me, hopefully. We look forward to meet you all at the San Francisco conference in October. We'll be there for sure. Now, let me start with my Zoom presentation. The title of my Zoom presentation is Early Chinese Kegs, Bottles and Other Trinkets as Precursors to Snuff Bottles. This is a Mandarin using snuff, and as you can see, he is holding a snuff bottle in his right hand. As an art historian and former museum director, I spent my time mainly collecting, studying, and publishing about Chinese art, and particularly about Chinese sculpture and crafts. Until my retirement at the end of 2009, this was just a hobby. After that, I was also able to work on this professionally as an independent researcher at the University of Amsterdam. In 2013, my first research project led to the publication of Dragon and Horse, Chinese saddle rugs and other horse tech from China and beyond. My second research project involved early Chinese miniatures, as Berthe has already told you so. A relatively unknown phenomenon, even in China. Now, until recently, within the framework of this research, I also collected these miniatures. After all, for me, collecting objects that interest me always means the first step in a research in order to gain the necessary hands-on experience. In January 2020, I obtained my PhD at the University of Amsterdam on my dissertation, Early Chinese Miniatures, the Disclosure of a Cultural Phenomenon. Now, the trade edition, titled Small China, Early Chinese Miniatures, was published by Arnold Art Publishers in Stuttgart, Germany, in November 2021. Hereafter, as was to be expected, I turned my attention to the later Chinese miniatures. I can't simply stop it. From the Ming and the Qing dynasties, which means that in addition to other later miniatures, I have collected no less than 90 snuff bottles in the past year. Of course, making use of my extensive worldwide network of art dealers and collector friends. That explains why I finally became a member of the International Chinese Snuff Bottle Society, to my own surprise. Because, quite frankly, I hadn't given the Chinese snuff bottle a glance, and I thought the Snuff Bottle Society was just a strange club. Well, Since I've put my prejudices aside, I think quite differently about it. My Zoom presentation is about early Chinese miniatures, some of which can be considered precursors to snuff bottles. At least I think so. But before I go into that, I would like to explain to you briefly what is meant by early Chinese miniatures, what they were used for, what they depict, and what their meaning is. So here's my definition. Miniatures are autonomous, three-dimensional, man-made objects of a manageable format. That is to say, not larger than circa 10 centimeters, and which are a deliberately reduced version of a comparable full-size object. So far, my definition. You see, miniatures had many different functions. The oldest were insignia, fetishes, or burial objects. Jade pendants, like this owl, were worn by chiefs or priests as distinguishing markers. This glazed stoneware mother breastfeeding her baby was used as a fetish by a pregnant woman or her family. Now, by breaking off the head, you can see it's broken here and clumsily restored. By breaking off the head and burying it with the body, so the head and the body together, it was believed that a miscarriage could be avoided. When they were excavated, centuries later on, the head was always glued back on in order to sell them. Miniatures depicting a single boy or girl had the same function. Statuettes of saints, like this early gilt bronze Buddha, one of the earliest, actually, were sold to pilgrims by monasteries along the Silk Roads. And so here we look at one of the oldest souvenirs, or because they were supposed to protect the travelers, to the earliest form of travel insurance. Burial gifts in Chinese, Mingqi, like this pair of jade pigs, traditionally a symbol of prosperity, were placed in the hands of the deceased to assure him or her of wealth in the afterlife. From the same period dates a wooden doll with silk clothes. It was unearthed in the Taklamakan Desert in Xinjiang province. Only because of the extreme drought of this area could it be preserved. Now, a similar doll is being held by this charming little girl, this size. Because the head has been broken off, oops, you can clearly see here that is glued on again. You know now that it is a fetish, but I'm showing her because of the doll she's holding. Also a toy, but this time for an adult, was this monkey riding a horse backwards, in Chinese, Shangma Ho. When pronounced, these words form a homonym, and the pun may you rise to the rank of a marquis, which means as much as may you get promoted. with a better salary, of course. Early Chinese miniatures can portray virtually anything. Let me show you. Deities like this gilt bronze Bodhisattva Kuan Yin. Mythical figures, such as a jade pendant in the form of a pig dragon. People, like this charioteer made of amber. Or animals, in this case, a glazed porcelain brush rest in the form of a pair of cranes on a tree trunk as a long life symbol, and therefore an ideal gift to bribe an official. But also plants and flowers, like this bundle of bamboo sticks made of rock crystal. Fruits, just this burial gift of a melon, apples, and nutmeg nuts made of gilded wood from the Liao period. Or even architecture, like this brown glazed stoneware miniature shrine with a tiny statue of the Buddha inside. Or means of transport. In this case, a glazed porcelain boat with only a lady in it, which means that this is a so-called love boat or a floating brothel. And even clouds and mountains, like this superb jade brush rest in the form of a mountain with 5 peaks, in Chinese, Wu Shan. At least as numerous are utilitarian objects, such as tools, weapons, furniture, and tableware, like this miniature bronze so-called chicken head water pot, only a few centimeters, like this. Or clothing and footwear. In the object's production, always in a scaled-down version of a comparable large object, widely diverse materials were used. First, expensive materials like jade, bronze, ivory, gold and silver, lacquer or amber. Later on, cheaper materials too, like ceramics, wood and bone. And even later still, exotic materials came into use that had to be imported from far away, mostly from Southeast China or farther away, Southeast Asia. And therefore, because they were important, they were expensive. Let me call you a few materials like rhinoceros horn, tropical woods, coral, and mother of pearl. These miniatures, and especially those given as gifts at birth, marriage, or promotion, could express good wishes, and at times they even served as bribes. Since many Chinese words are pronounced the same way, despite signifying different things, some of the miniatures have a double meaning, so-called secret meanings, a secret message behind the explicit one. What makes the object even more interesting is also the representation of everyday themes, like this adorable toddler in a poop chair. And intimate themes, such as this father with a child on his lap, subjects that were nigh on taboo in the official fine arts. The same applies to erotica, like a melon-shaped box I'm showing here, with an explicit erotic scene inside of a couple making love. Or games, of which this early chess piece depicting a man is a good example. The chess game, imported from Central Asia, did not become popular in China until the 12th century. But humor too often played a role in the motive. Do you see how well, and especially how witty, the artist has portrayed this dog that is waiting expectantly for his owner? Or this monkey holding a wineskin. Here's the wineskin, made of leather. Now, wine made from grapes was only imported from Central Asia from the 7th century via the Silk Roads, I should say, because there were many roads. The following image shows that this is a rather discriminatory joke. Because this is a Western barbarian, recognizable by his beard, crooked nose, and pointed head, who clings to the same wineskin as the monkey shown before does. Now, this way, miniatures, and this is very important, I think, grants us insights into Chinese society and everyday life from 1,000 years ago and even much earlier. After this, hopefully not too long and boring introduction, I finally get to my actual subject. Miniatures, and in particular containers and crockery, as precursors of snuff bottles. So let's start with the containers, usually functioning as personal property and luxury items. Both men and women carried boxes in all kinds of materials, shapes, and sizes for storing things that they regularly needed. These are, of course, always provided with a lid, and in some cases also with one or more suspension eyes. The shape of the boxes varies from round, oval, square, and rectangular to lobed. In the latter case, it is often a form inspired by the lotus flower. In the vast majority of cases, the lid closes tightly over the box itself. But with metal examples, it can sometimes also be screwed on. Amber or jade specimens in the form of an animal, such as a fish or a swan, usually date from the Tang or Liao period. This is explained by the popularity that hunting and fishing enjoyed among this people, who in terms of origin were not Han Chinese. Not even the famous Tang were Han Chinese. They were actually from a minority, but came to power. Those who were able to afford these luxury items kept substances in a finely ground, spreadable, and volatile form. This concerned makeup items, like this glazed porcelain box for cosmetics shown here, as well as medicines, incense, perfumes, and seal paste. It is obvious that salt and herbs for the preparation of food and drink were also preserved this way, although there is virtually nothing to be found about this in the literature of this period. Some tubular containers dated to the Warring States period were used for storing needles. They were made of bronze, decorated with inlays of gold and silver, etc., and equipped with a screw cap and eyelets for attaching to a cord or chain. In addition to portability, the small size of the boxes is also related to the high value of what is stored in them. This also explains why craftsmen often paid considerably more attention to the materials and processing of these containers than to the much larger boxes. The traditionally worn Chinese clothing did not have pockets of the type that are currently found on Western style clothing. However, some items of clothing did offer the possibility of storing personal items. For example, in secret pockets or pleats on the inside or in sleeves. In the art trade, a small-sized mirror is not called a sleeve mirror for nothing. Sorry for the bad quality of this scanned photo, but yet most of the personal belongings, whether or not in bags or small boxes, were hung on the belt by means of a cord or chain and an attached toggle. This wall painting on the right from a Liao grave in Inner Mongolia shows a man carrying a box in the shape of a swan on the body. The box is hanging here. A similar swan-shaped box made of amber is shown on the left. That relatively many boxes have been preserved is because the relatives buried them as living burial gifts, in Chinese renqi, with the deceased, although some must also have been specially made to be given as dead burial gifts, in Chinese mingqi. While most clothing items and other items of organic material have perished, these boxes are usually found directly on the body. The precise location on the chest or near the waist sometimes makes clear what function they had. This applies in particular to the accessories that were carried on the belt. Jade and bronze specimens, just like the later specimens of gold, silver, and other precious materials, had a better chance of survival, not only because of these materials were more durable than the simpler ones of ceramics or wood, but also because of their preciousness. They were simply handled with greater care for this reason. The oldest preserved ceramic and bronze boxes date from the Western Zhou period, while gold and silver inlaid specimens, like this one shown here, date from the Eastern Zhou period, so about 400 before our era. Boxes of jade were even much rarer. The earliest can be dated to the Han period. The use of other materials also increased during this time, given the countless burial finds of boxes made entirely of gold and silver. The use of these precious metals had become fashionable due to more frequent contacts with neighboring nomadic peoples. That boxes of painted lacquerware from the Warring States and the Han periods have also been preserved is because the lacquer protected the underlying wood against moisture, and because they were often given as burial gifts in airtight sealed tombs. Boxes of lacquerware with so many layers superimposed on each other that a decoration could be carved into it in deep relief date from the Yuan period or afterwards. The same applies to boxes made of animal cloisonné, a technique that was introduced to China by craftsmen from Central Asia in the Yuan period. Despite the great variety in the material used, the majority of the preserved boxes are made of ceramic, which means earthenware, stoneware, or porcelain. They were made by almost all pottery centers. Colorful, attractive, and therefore sought after by collectors are these earthenware boxes covered with a tricolor lead glaze called sansai. Beautiful, aren't they? These are from the British Museum in London. Now, let's take a look at the miniatures depicting crockery. With a miniature crockery, like this burial gift in the form of a basket, the shape often follows the function of the same object in actual size. In that case, only the functional meaning is relevant. However, in some cases, such a functional object might have a symbolical meaning too. That mainly concerns the vase, in Chinese hu or ping. As part of the 8 Buddhist lucky symbols, the vase stands for the elixir of life, as well as for the storage of treasures, which symbolizes the fulfillment of all wishes. Vase, ping, is homonymous with the word for peace. The Chinese word for glaze is homonymous with the word for crackle, while in repetitive form, it is homonymous with year after year, sui sui. Hence, donating a vase with the crackled glaze, such as these blue-green glazed vases of the Guan type that enjoyed imperial preference during the Song period and much later, meant may you be safe and preserved year after year, sui sui ping an. Sometimes it's a figurative component that defines the image, such as a Sichuan jarlet from the Jin or Yuan dynasty, with a painted decoration depicting a Mandarin walking home. And at the other side, a woman, probably his wife, is waiting for him. So an ideal present for a married couple, or for parents whose son is going for the state exam. Another just as rare example is the bronze water pot from the Sui period with a chicken head spout that I've shown before. The box, ge, is just as meaningful as the vase. It is the symbol for and also homonymous with the Chinese words for harmony and being together, ge, ge. So boxes formed an ideal wedding gift, and that is why a relatively large amount has been preserved. The word for a pot on three legs in Chinese ding sounds the same as the word for bar. It was used as a form and a unit of weight for gold and silver, and also was the word for insured. So both the pot on three legs and the gold or silver bar are part of the 100 valuables, a well-known motive in China. This motive refers to things that from the Song period onwards, but especially in the Ming and Qing periods, were associated with the literate. It therefore symbolizes literacy and what is associated with it. The bucket has a symbolic meaning too, because the word bucket in Chinese dong is homonymous with together. The contraction of the words for bucket and a pair of shoes, xie, again yields the homonym together, dongxie. So the representation of a bucket and a pair of shoes means, may man and woman grow old together. In Chinese, 同学到老. To conclude my story, I would like to comment on what we can learn from this early miniatures with regard to the later snuff bottles. Let me start with the choice of materials. Basically, it doesn't differ that much. After all, just as was the case with the miniatures, those materials were preferred that were not only precious, but also had a certain symbolic, if not magical, meaning. I'm mainly referring to jade and all similar semi-precious stones, but also to exotic materials such as ivory, amber stag, or rhinoceros horn, tortoise shell, tropical woods, coral, and mother of pearl. The value of the object and the associated prestige that it bestowed upon its possessor was also determined by the craftsmanship and production time required to process the material. In a number of cases, professional expertise from abroad had to be called upon. I'm, of course, referring to the role that Jesuits in particular played in the refinement of glass blowing and the application of animal techniques on porcelain, glass, and metal. In those cases, the choice of materials was undoubtedly dictated by the need for exclusive and trendy objects by which one could confirm one's own status. Most shapes and decorative motifs of snuff bottles are borrowed from traditional examples. This is especially true for the more formal shapes and decorative motifs used for snuff bottles that were commissioned by the imperial court. The only significant change from all the miniatures is the use of a stopper with an ivory or metal spoon attached to close the bottle. That traditional design is only released when they are produced from the middle of the 19th century, like this example, for sale to foreigners. Like this fancy, if not vulgar to the taste of Chinese literate, animal cloisonné snuff bottle. From that time on, all kinds of freer designs became fashionable, such as this cabinet piece made of amethyst and more adapted to a Western taste. It is quite possible that in a limited number of cases, older miniatures were reused as snuff bottles. My first candidate mark my words, candidate for such a reuse is an extremely rare miniature animal cloisonné pilgrim flask, dating from the 17th century. I will always regret that I missed the opportunity to acquire this miniature. Well, you will undoubtedly all recognize that feeling. This is the backside of the flask and one of the sides. Another example is this 18th or early 19th century Nepalese brass ink bottle with lizard-shaped handles from the snuff bottle collection of a German collector. So look at the handles. I'll show you this bottle because an equally rare snuff bottle from the famous Mullen collection has handles in the form of mice or rats that bear striking resemblance to the former brass bottle. Such reuse can, of course, only be proven if it is established that the stopper added later has been preserved. However, that will probably only apply to snuff bottles that are found excavated from graves. Because then you know for sure that is, if it has a stopper, that it is a reused earlier piece. So, my story boils down to the fact that the materials, techniques, shapes, and decoration patterns of snuff bottles go back to a much longer tradition. However, their function as containers of snuff tobacco was new. The snuff bottles occupy a special place in the later miniatures, the subject of my ongoing research, because their luxury combined with their fashion sensitivity made them a preeminent status symbol. Good for the ego of those who possessed power and money, not so very different from what is true today, but also, thank God, very good for all those craftsmen who could earn a good living with it.
Thank you, Koos. I think this was like amazing.
Oh, that's
so I really appreciate it. But unfortunately, I had to step out. She had an emergency. So so I'll just kind of open up the conversation. I have to say thank you for this wonderful talk. We all, I think, have you know, sort of, there's another saying in Chinese, is perceiving grandness through smallness. And so this is small containers being made in the image of larger objects. And so they are enhancing their qualities to the viewer and the collector. And I think also in prior discussions, Claire had mentioned, due to a lot of the traveling nature of a lot of the courts, especially the Qing and the Mongols in particular, they had to carry a lot of objects when they went from A to B. And so they kind of took a lot of the smaller objects in traveling boxes. And as you see, the Qianlong Emperor had a lot of these small curio cabinets, you know, that tie into the research. Having said that, I think I let Julia sort of see, have there been questions in the chat that we want to open up to?
If you have questions, you can just go ahead and ask them. We are, I think, a small enough group to be able to handle that.
And one more comment for Koos, I'll put it on his forum feed. I actually have a similar Pilgrim cloisonné bottle that you just showed that was clearly converted into a table snuff bottle. So I'll post that for your conversation. And so
wonderful.
You can,
thank you so much in advance.
Yeah.
Yes, please, if you're interested in this forum, it's we're trying a little bit of a bigger approach there. We need your input and we need your participation in order to see if this is something we can do in the future. So if you haven't done that, please go to the forum part on the website if you're not registered. please register and participate if you feel like doing so. And thank you. That was an amazing lecture. Very different approach from what we usually hear. This is great. Any questions?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I have one small question. I missed the beginning part of the lecture, and your definition of miniature was what, less than how many inches or cms?
And would you like to introduce yourself since Koos doesn't know you?
Oh, I'm Ann Chu. I suppose I'm one of the snuff bottle collectors, but and I'm in I'm in New York at the moment.
Did I understood correctly that you want to hear again my definition? Is that?
Yeah, what was your selection of size as far as what is defined as a miniature? Because you
What is
said
the
these are
point of a
miniatures.
miniature? That should everyone make out for himself or herself. But I can tell you what I think. What is a miniature? A definition of it. Do you want to hear? Do you want me to repeat that?
Yes, could you repeat that? Because I was
Okay. I will do
distracted.
so because it's of course it's important to understand. Miniatures are autonomous, so not a part of something. Autonomous, three-dimensional, so not pictures, engraving, etc. Three-dimensional, man-made, of a manageable format, this size. That is to say, not larger than 10 centimeters, and which are a deliberately reduced version of a comparable full-size object. That is the definition.
Right, because that's what I thought I heard you say 10 cm, but then in some of your pictures, you showed something that was about 25 cm. So I said, oh, I wasn't paying attention. I didn't know what the hell was going
yeah,
on.
well, I refer to just one full-size object that was this Westerner with the crooked nose and the beard, etc., holding a similar
Right, yeah.
a
wine bag.
Yeah, because I wanted to explain the meaning of this monkey holding wine. It's in fact satire. They are mocking these Westerners. They were not always that popular, these Westerners, you know, as they are today, by the way. And so this was the only full-scale, large-size object I shown just to explain something. Okay.
Because that would exclude some of my table snuff bottles. We were talking about it the last time, and these are snuff bottles that, you know, are used in common, and so that's why they were set on the table to give to the guests. And so their size is usually about 20 cm or so.
Okay.
So
Okay. Well,
sorry?
I see a cat coming up. There are quite a lot of miniatures depicting cats, by the way.
Cats.
Yeah.
But you know what? Cats are definitely just from the Ming and Qing period, because early on they were quite a negative thing to mention. So cats are not popular before to depict cats was not a popular thing before the Ming period.
And then you had brought up a picture of a Nepalese, and then you had a word that I didn't recognize. What is messing?
Messing.
It's brass.
I think I was mentioning
Brass.
Nepalese ink bottle, brass.
Yes.
Oh, brass. Okay, all right.
Messing is the German word for brass.
But
Great, thank you.
Did I use messing?
Yes.
Yes, you said messing,
okay.
and I was saying,
should
I've
be
never heard of
brass.
this word. Yeah,
Sorry for that.
no problem.
And
I
you
must
had a
say that
question.
I really enjoyed your talk. And of course, I'm a long fan of the University of Amsterdam because I was there back in '77 at the Antonio Leeuwenhoek. Is that how you pronounce it? The cancer center there.
Okay.
And I spent some time in, what's that, Rijswijk, the TNO, that's next to Delft.
I see.
And I remember having to feed 2 baby marmosets over the weekend because the techs went there. So
How long did you stay in Amsterdam?
oh, it was Amsterdam. Well, I was on a sabbatical in London. at the
Okay.
time.
Okay.
And there was a very close relationship between London and Amsterdam.
Mhm.
The
See.
two universities were very close. So we used to go to each other's places all the time.
Okay.
And I really enjoyed that. I think I was in Delft for maybe about 2 or 3 weeks, but that was it.
Okay, let's move on. Courtney, I see you. Andrew has a question. Andrew, you go first.
Okay. Quick question. When Koos, with your definition of a miniature being in part a reduced copy of something full size or larger,
Yes.
how do snuff bottles fit into that unless a full size would be a vase or something of that sense?
That's a very good question. And I was expecting this, and it couldn't be else than you. Well, there are two reasons why an object can be classified as a miniature, either by its function or by its shape. And I will give you an example. When you have, for instance, a miniature, a water dropper, by function, this is not a miniature. You see, because there are not this size water dropper. So a water dropper by itself is not a miniature, but as soon as the water dropper depicts a miniature lion, most do, then it can be classified as a miniature because of the shape. You see? Because the lion is definitely a miniature of in size of full size lion. That's why. But this is quite theoretical. I was absolutely attacked by my professors about this, but I was able to defend this. Yeah. More questions?
Courtney, if you have a question, unmute yourself.
I was surprised that you didn't show any of the typical porcelain, wider mouthed, cylindrical jars that were used for medicines. Because, you know, I actually have a couple of them, and they apparently were not snuff bottles. They were specifically for
Absolutely, you're right. Yes.
they had much wider mouths to them.
Yeah,
So,
I mentioned in my story that these jarlets were used for medicines as well, you know. But you're right, I didn't show an example. Maybe you can.
I'll go see if I can lay my hands on one. But go on with the question.
Or later, or we start up a forum discussion. That's also a way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great, actually, Courtney.
I'll go get one.
Any other questions? Or-
Yes, I was admiring at the breadth of your collection. And I was wondering, where did you get them? Were they all from the Netherlands, or were they in your travels?
No, I collected them for decades all over the world, and particularly in Hong Kong, and because I wasn't that rich, I often went to Macau. And that was in the 90s, 1990s or so. But later on, I bought them everywhere from art dealers, auction house, etc., etc.
Can I ask you something, Koos?
By the way, the examples I showed you were not all from my collection, also from, that's why I had these captions telling that somewhere from the British Museum, Metropolitan, etc. So only, I guess, half of them are from my collection, but many from museum collection, other private collections, etc. So don't be mistaken about this, okay?
No, I'm assuming that all the ones that had the Jong on it was yours and not another one.
No,
Yeah.
it's not, no.
Right,
No.
thank you.
Your name was on it, the Jong.
Yes,
No,
yeah,
that's right.
oh, okay, yeah, the examples with my name.
That's right, yes.
That's our collection, which has already, half of the collection has already been donated to the Rijksmuseum, and the there's a Dutch society of people dealing with Asian art. Half of them is donated, and the other half is sold in the years to come, not by me, but by an important art dealer who will sell them in consignment, because I hate to go around it. And I have to explain to you, this is the way I have to operate, because I'm already engaged in this collection of later Chinese miniatures, and I'm not a millionaire. So I decided to donate half of the collection, and the other half is sold in order to raise some money to finance a new collection. That's the way I operate.
But there was a tremendous breadth in your
Okay.
collection.
Who is?
Is lekkere mes. Koos,
Yeah.
hi.
Hi again. We had a telephone call this afternoon. By
Yeah.
the way, yeah.
But then I hadn't seen your presentation yet, of course. Well, the second image that you showed was a Buddha, a China guild.
Yeah. If I
Give-
remember well, this is from the Asian Art Museum.
Yeah. Anyway, but is that was it a big image or?
No. It's small, like this too. It's one of the earliest, maybe the earliest representation of the Buddha. Quite famous, by the way. This is, it's in every book, and that's why I choose it.
Did they have? Did they check if the guild was original or whether it was painted before?
I assume, because it's from the collection of the Asian Art Museum, they know what they're doing.
I know, but sometimes they're painted before.
No. It's but it's a good question. Actually, fire gilding was an invention only from, I think, the 3rd century BC. Before that, the gold was hammered on the bronze object. So if it is suggesting an early object with fire gilding, then it's definitely a fake.
Yeah.
But now I'm going too much in detail. Sorry.
Courtney, did you find something?
Well, I didn't find the one that I was looking for. I
That's in the books. We can
found
find
a
it.
couple of others. This one, I think, probably is a snuff bottle, because it does. It has just an opening that is literally like 1 centimeter.
Uh-huh.
The one that I was looking for belongs to a friend of mine, and I think I returned it to her. And it had a stopper in it that had quite a wide mouth, and the stopper was not what I would consider to be a snuff bottle stopper. It wasn't a cork with a spoon.
Yeah.
It was, I'm trying to remember, it was almost like a piece of material that was literally stuffed in the top. And I don't know what the meaning of that was. And then here's another one that is a total of about 5 3/4 inches high. But it's like a little jar, and it has quite it's about 2 centimeters across the whole part.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Quite a lot have been found in Southeast Asia and in Indonesia.
Yeah.
I suppose I have a question for Claire, in the sense that when we were talking about the medicine bottles, the bottles that have 2 heads on them upside down, you flip them around, they're usually rectangular, they've got some sort of a script with medicine written on the side. Those are medicine bottles that were converted to snuff bottles, right?
Yeah, I think that. Can you hear me? Because I'm in.
Yeah, you're traveling. We can see you're traveling.
Yes, we can hear you.
But you're not driving, I hope.
No, I'm not driving.
Wrong side.
I think that this whole premise of medicine bottles being used as snuff bottles, being converted to snuff bottles, is slightly tenuous, in fact. I think there probably were some that were converted for use, but the belief that has been held in the past by many snuff bottle collectors that snuff bottles originated as a result of the existence of medicine bottles simply doesn't stand up, because because medicine bottles in terms of craft were a much more lowly craft than snuff bottles, which originated in the palace.
Yeah.
And I think it was the reason that snuff was originally put into bottles was because it was a sort of perfect storm moment where you had snuff being imported and offered as tributes to the emperor at the same time that the palace workshops, the enamel, the glass workshops, the jade workshops were being set up. So I'm very cautious about saying anything about the connection between medicine and snuff bottles, even though I know that it's been written about. The other thing I did want to say was that it was very interesting to me, Koos, when you talked about using earlier miniatures for snuff bottles, because when Dr. Yu at the National Palace Museum, when she gave her talk for our Taipei virtual convention, she also mentioned the same thing, that essentially in the palace in the 17th and 18th century, many things that were miniatures that were used as snuff bottles. So I think it's more interesting to focus on that connection rather than the medicine snuff bottle connection. But you can all disagree with me if you want.
Thank you, Claire. I'm relieved. I'm off the hook, so to speak. Well, just a joke.
We are privileged to have so many very knowledgeable members in our society. This is really a treat. Are we having any other questions? If not, then I would like to close this and wish you all a happy fall and see you all in a little bit over a month.
Absolutely.
San Francisco.
We look forward to it.
We are very much, after 2 years, we are very, very due. Seriously, looking forward to see all of you. Thank you for chiming in. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good weekend, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye bye. See you in San Francisco.
Bye bye.
Yeah.